this is lesson 10, part C. We're going to talk about completing the square. But so let's talk about completing the square, very simplified here, and just say, hey, find the value that completes the square and then rewrites as a perfect square. So we need to find a number that fills the blank here that I can factor it to form a perfect square binomial. And what I mean by that is something as simple as x minus 2 squared. Okay? X minus 2 squared, if you remember, is the same thing as x minus 2 times x minus 2. Yeah? So if I can find that I can factor, some way, create something off of number 1 and 2 there, that I can factor to the exact same factors, that means I can write it as x minus 2 or x minus whatever it is squared. That's what I'm aiming for. Does anybody remember how we can make that happen? I think we've done this before. Okay, we could FOIL it. That would give us back our quadratic, at least for our example up here. But what about number 1? What would I have to do to find that number, that C value, that means I can factor it? Olivia? Yep.
Should there be an x after 28?
Yes. Sorry. There should be an x after 28. I'm going to put an x in there. I can't change it on here because it's a photo. So, it's x squared plus 28x plus something. That's going to allow me to write it as a perfect square binomial. Now this is kind of like the middle steps in the process. I think there's about 8 steps in completing the square when we go to solve a problem. So we're going to try to hammer this out to make sure you guys understand this first and then move on. So, what is it? It's as simple as this. It's as simple as taking 1/2 of b squared. You got it kind of ringing a bell? Half of b squared. In this problem, what's a? No, it's not. X squared. It's 1. It's the coefficient. What's b? 28. What's c? We don't have one yet. We got to create one. And so we are going to create one that says, hey, that c value is going to be 1/2 of b squared. Now, this is going to be something that I'm going to do. We're going to do it the long way first. I'm going to show you that maybe we shouldn't do it this way. We're going to actually show you a little bit shortcut. Don't have to go as far. That's going to help you out a lot more. So, what's b again? 28. What's half of 28?
14.
It's 14. And what's 14 squared? So we should be saying, okay, it's 28 divided by 2, which is 14. I got to square that. Which is squared, and 14 times 14 is? I don't think it's 164. Something like 196? You guys should take your calculators out if you guys don't know your perfect squares. So 196. So in that spot, I should have 196. That's my answer for the first part that says to find the value that completes the square. 196 is that answer. Then it says rewrite it as a perfect square. Well, to rewrite it, that means I have to factor it. Okay, so we have to factor that thing. So I need to write it like this, right? So it's x and x, because that's the only way to get x squared. But now I have to ask myself, so 196, what are the numbers or the factors of 196 that'll work to 14? Well, 1 in 196 give me a 28? No, I meant 28. Should give me 28. How about a 2 and 196 divided by 2? 90, 98? 98? 2 and 98? Will that give me a 28? No way, right? No way to get there. So we keep going through our checklist, and we find out what numbers multiply to 196, but add up to 28. 14, yeah! 14 and? 14. Now, what are the signs on these?
Adding.
They They know it has to multiply to a positive 196, but add up to a positive 28. So that means both of them are plus. So wait a minute. Just like our example above, I'll get x plus 14 times x plus 14, which means, yeah, x plus 14 squared. There's your perfect square binomial. Now wait a minute. What would make our life a lot easier? Where does the 14 come from? The half of b. So wait a minute, ladies and gentlemen. Listen to this step. When I wrote, guys, it as the value, what if I would have left it as, instead of 196, would have left it as 14 squared? Could I then just say, hey, wait a minute, I know the answer is going to be a 14? Yes. So the number that you find for half of b is the answer inside the binomial. If b happens to be negative, then half of a negative number is still negative. Eventually you're squaring it so it becomes positive, but then it would be x minus whatever that is, squared. And if you don't believe me, guys, FOIL x plus 14 squared, you'll get the same result as x plus 14 times x plus 14. La-di-da-di-da. It works. Any questions on that? Let's look at number 2. M squared minus 1/8 m plus something. The reason I know that this is going to be always plus something is because I'm going to eventually do what to be? I'm going to square it. And if I square any number, it always becomes positive. Like any real numbers. Okay? Now, what's b in this case? It's a negative 1/8. And now I've got to divide that by 2, right? And square it. Oh boy. Okay, I'm liking this. Someone said, well, I don't like to divide fractions by a whole number. I'd rather take the 2, make it a fraction, or make it a 2 over 1, and multiply by its reciprocal. Guys, that's a complex fraction. So technically, this equals a negative 1/8 times 1 over 2, or 1/2. And I will square that. Is everybody seeing how that did not change my problem? Yeah. Now, how do you multiply fractions? Multiply across. So this would be a negative 1 times 1, which is negative 1. And 8 times 2 is 16. Squared. Okay, and how do you square a fraction? You multiply or square the top and the bottom. So negative 1 squared is 1 over 16. 16 squared? 256. Okay. So our problem, our value for C is 1 over 256. Now I'm going to take a poll of hands here. How many people want to factor 1 over 256? Pretty much nobody wants to. It's not a nice number. But wait a minute, guys. If I have to write that perfect square binomial, it's just going to end up being m minus 1/16. Or plus a negative 1/16. Guys, it's because the value of a half of b is what goes in the perfect square binomial. It's factored then. It's the shortcut to factoring when we create it. Now this doesn't always work, guys, if you guys don't know the answer or we're not completing the square and we're just asked to factor, okay? But because we are making or creating a perfect square binomial, the half of b part before you square it is the inside number for factor. Okay? This is an intermediate step. I wanted to do this because that way you guys can understand where my numbers are coming from. So, going to the next one, I'm going to pause the video and we're going to move on quickly after that. So if you're watching it, it's going to go quick. Completing the square. I'll go over these steps as you guys write them down, and then I'm going to pause it for you guys to finish. Completing the square. Separate the variables from all else. That means your variables, x's, m's, y's, whatever they are, on one side, numbers on the other. Make sure a equals 1. And if not, you divide by whatever the a value is. Now step 3, add 1/2 b squared to both sides. That's what we just did. You factor one side by making it a perfect square binomial using the half of b. And then you simplify the other. That means gather like terms. If there's numbers, put them together in a common denominator, la-di-da-di-da. And now you have something squared equaling a number. And step 5, to solve, you can take the square root of both sides. Don't forget plus and minus because you're solving for a variable. And then you solve for the variable. And we'll talk about what happens here because you're going to have probably a square root and then a non-square root number. So let's take a look at this problem, which is x squared plus 10x plus 30 equals 9. We're starting off fairly easy. In my directions, I said if a does not equal 1, we got to make it 1. In this case, is a 1? Yes.
Yeah.
So we're not going to worry about that for now. First step said, separate the variables from everything else. What is not a variable up there?
9.
The 9 and 30. So I'm going to get 30 to the other side. Okay? So, subtract 30 from both sides. And so I get x squared plus 10x equals, now I left the space in there for a reason. Negative, not 28, 21. Okay, now, at this point, I got the variables on one side, the other stuff on the other side, and step 2 says make sure a equals 1. A does equal 1, so I can jump to step number 3, correct? Step number 3 says do what to both sides? Add something. And so I'm going to add something to both sides. That's why I left a space there, ladies and gentlemen. And what am I going to add? Half of b. What is b? 10. What's half of 10? I'm going to put 5 squared on the left side. Why am I putting 5 squared there? That's half of b, but why did I not take that and square it?
Too much work.
What are we going to use that 5 for?
Completing the square.
It's going to end up becoming the number that goes in our perfect square binomial, remember?
Yeah.
But what is 5 squared?
25.
Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, the left side, I purposely leave it as half of b squared versus the other side, because I'm going to simplify, I actually square it. It's because the next step said factor the left side or factor the side that has the variables, and it becomes just x. What was half of b? A positive 5, so it's x plus 5 equals 4. See how much easier that step becomes when I don't have to expand it and then factor it? We are going to be solving for x. And now the next step says start to solve it by taking the square root of both sides. But when you take the square root, don't forget plus or minus. So I put the plus or minus in front of the square root of 4. And we all know, or should know, that when you square root something that's squared, they will cancel each other. So I'm going to cancel those. And you end up with x plus 5. And you have the plus or minus of 2. This one's working out with some nice numbers. We like it. It's not always going to happen to be a nice number. So be careful with that. And now I have to solve it by subtracting 5. Now, this is where people are going to make a mistake. We know that we have a plus and a minus 2, and then we have to subtract 5. So this is what I'm telling you to do. I am telling you to take the number that you're moving over and always place it in front. Always place that 5, that negative 5 you brought over, place it first, and then leave it as plus or minus 2. It's because there are two answers. There is negative 5 plus 2, and there's a negative 5 minus 2. Now, would everybody agree that negative 5 and 2 are nice numbers? Yeah. As in, they're not square roots. Even that if they were square roots, we still would have to do this essentially. There are two answers. There is one of the answers, like I just said, and the other answer is negative 5 minus 2. Negative 5 plus 2 is negative 3, and the other answer is negative 5 minus 2. Those are the two answers. And guess what you should do if you want to move to that next level? Check both of those in the original problem. I'll tell you what. If you guys do complete the square correctly, it will always give you the correct solutions, whether they're real or they're imaginary. So make sure that you just do things correctly. Everything's good to go. Next problem. 8a squared minus 16a minus 56 equals 8. I'm going to stop my video. I want you guys to get as far as you can before we come together. Follow the steps. So here we go. The first step again is separate, which means add 56 to both sides. So 8a squared minus 16a equals 64. Okay, guys, follow with me. Follow the steps. I mean, the first and second step can be switched, okay? But now, is a equal 1? No. A is 8. So I need to divide both sides by 8. So 8 divided by 8 is 1 now. Minus 2a plus something is equal to 8 plus something.
Divide by 2.
Now b is negative 2. What's half of negative 2?
Negative 1.
It's negative 1 squared. And negative 1 squared is? 1. So when I go to factor that left side, it's a minus 1 squared equals 9. And now we just solve it. We just completed the squared to solve it. So now, square root both sides, and don't forget, plus or minus. So a minus 1 equals plus or minus 3. Add 1. So a equals 1 plus or minus 3, or 1 plus 3, which is 4, or 1 minus 3, which is negative 2. Okay, guys, this one, I chose this one because I think it does not come to nice numbers, if I remember correctly. So I'm going to show you what happens when you take square roots of not nice numbers and what you can do with it. Okay, so again, a is equal to 1, so that's going to help us eliminate at least one step, right? So first thing I need to do here is add 33. And so I get p squared plus 5p plus something equals 24? No, it's not negative, it's positive. Plus something. Now, we got to take half of 5. I'm not going to put that as 2.5. I will leave it. It's 5 over 2. Because what I'm really doing here, guys, is taking a half of 5. And remember, it's 5 over 1, so it's 5 over 2. I would not necessarily mark it wrong, but you won't get to that next level, right? You're not leaving things in an appropriate form. So, hopefully everybody agrees that half of 5 is just 5 divided by 2. And I'm going to square it. And we talked about how do you square a fraction? Top and the bottom. 5 squared is 25 over 4. Okay. The left-hand side, we go to factor, and it becomes p plus 5 over 2. Nice and easy. But the right-hand side, if I want to add those together, I need to have a common denominator. Common denominator between 1 and 4 is 4. So I'm going to multiply this one by 4 over 4. What's 24 times 4? 96. 96 over 4 plus 25 over 4. That equals what over 4? 121, okay. Hey, that's not bad. I actually like that. Why?
It equals 30.25.
No, I don't want it to go to decimals. Don't go to decimals. But we can't simplify that. But what's my next step? Square root. And when you square root a fraction, what happens? Square the top and bottom. 121 is a perfect square. 4 is a perfect square. It turns out to be nice. Don't forget what? Plus and minus in there. We know that those two will cancel each other. So therefore we get p plus 5 halves is equal to plus or minus 11 over 2. So it actually is not that bad of a problem, even though we had to deal with a fraction in there. Guys, it's important, like I told you, we're going to subtract 5 halves. Subtract 5 halves, and where does that 5 halves go? Before. So you get p equals negative 5 halves plus or minus 11 halves, because it's negative 5 halves plus 11 halves, which is 6 halves, which is 3, and negative 5 halves minus 11 halves, negative 16 over 2, which is negative 8. Nice answers. Now, I'm going to tell you guys, sometimes that ends up staying as a square root. At that point, you don't have to separate into 2 separate answers like there. You would leave it in this form. Now, if they have a common denominator, put it to a common denominator. But you can leave it as something like, listen, you could leave it as something as negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 11 all over 2. That's fine. Okay? Your homework is the worksheet that's going to be handed out.